So welcome, Melanie Feldman. Melanie Feldman is an author, entrepreneur, and works in the high-tech field at Apple. She's the author of the book Bold, Get Noticed, Get Hired. She's also created a new digital online learning platform called You Are Going Places. And basically, she's taking her areas of expertise as a networker and as a job seeker and a job coach to really provide knowledge in a simple way that will help you accomplish your goals as it pertains to your career trajectory. So Melanie, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I'm excited to get started.
Thank you. That was such a warm welcome. Thank you so much, Bradley, and so excited to be here, guys. Just what Career Up Now, Moishe House is creating, just this opportunity for people to take time and get to know each other. I think it's just so valuable. And so me speaking with you guys, I thought what would probably be most helpful is to give you a little background on myself, a little further more than what Bradley talked about, give you a couple learnings that I've taken over the last 10 years, and then a few pieces of information that I think will make a networking event the most valuable to you. So with that, I'll just start with my own background. So let's take it back. I graduated college and could not find a job. And I think that I like talking about that because that's really why I'm here today and why I've even, got in this space and where I am. And I couldn't find a job and I was applying. And I don't know, maybe raise your hand if you've ever been in that situation before where you feel stuck and you feel like, am I going down the wrong path? Am I doing something wrong? For me, I thought I was, well accomplished graduating college. I thought, okay, I'm going to get some responses here. And I spent 4 months not getting a response to any job. So I switched it up. I started really networking and focusing on that instead of applying for a job. So getting in touch with people at companies I wanted to work at. And what was so crazy to me was that within a month of that, I had interviews at every place I'd wanted to work for before. And so it just kind of shocked me a little. I thought, okay, in college, I had learned all these great skills. I had internships, but no one ever taught me how to apply for a job. And so that was my book, Bold, Get Noticed, Get Hired. It really started with me landing my first job. I had Skype interviewed from Hawaii, where I'm from, to this really cool company in New York City. That was the first ever Skype interview that happened to get a job there. And I flew over and I was telling my friends oh yeah, this is what I did. I contacted the CEO's assistant and got on the phone with her. She referred me. And everyone was like, whoa, sounds like kind of a lot. And so I wrote the book because I wanted to show people that's not kind of a lot. That is how you have to do it. And so the book, and if you have a chance to take a look at it, it's really just inspirational stories of people all over the world who have done really cool and creative things to get their foot in the door. And the one takeaway I'll say from the book that I just absolutely will hold to this day is that no one was afraid to be bold. And, I named my book Bold, Get Noticed, Get Hired. And all these different things people did that I learned about through interviewing them for the book. At the time, I'm sure people were like, that seems like a lot, or you should be embarrassed of yourself. And the reality is, all those people are successful and no one's asking them that. And so it was this big takeaway for me of hey, Mel, you're so scared of rejection and that holds you back in so many ways. But if you can remove that piece and say, all right, my biggest fears now aside, you go so much further in life because you realize the worst thing that can happen is someone says no. And if they say no, and you're okay with that, then you can move on. And so that was the book. And it was cool. It was the first real thing that got me, started in this industry of just helping people navigate their careers. That was 8 years ago. And so in the last 8 years, alongside of my advertising career, I've really my passion is helping people in this space. And so, early last year, I started Going Places, the company that Bradley was referring to. And in July, we launched our first course. So the course that you all will get after tonight, I think, it really takes a step back from the traditional way of how you would normally apply for a job. And it has you thinking about it in a completely different direction. And that kind of takes me to, the networking piece, because I don't know if you guys have ever felt this way, but when I'm networking, when I'm put into this position of, whether it's a career fair or whether it's speed dating networking or whether it's, whatever it is, all of a sudden you get this pressure to accomplish so much in whatever time period you have, right? You have 10 minutes on the clock, go. And you're like, oh my God, okay, what's your name? Where are you from? How can you help me? And I think for me, what I find so valuable, because I hate that, And what I realized is like I wasn't getting anywhere with those kinds of techniques of just trying to put so much pressure on myself to get something out of a conversation. And so what I really challenge you guys to do today, which is something that I find so valuable, is take a step back and realize you don't have to accomplish the world in a 10-minute conversation that you have. But what's important is asking genuine questions, getting to know someone, having a conversation where you're just listening and you're learning and you're showing that, hey, mentors took time to be here today, and I value that time. And I just want to know more about you. And, let me ask some really good questions. And what's so great is if you take a step back and you listen and you take some notes, that's when you can follow up and it can be so powerful, right? Like, hey, Emily, I loved what we talked about tonight. Thank you so much for taking the time. The one thing that really stuck with me was XYZ that you said. I'd love to, maybe get caught, do a virtual coffee date with you sometime next week. And that's and this type of opportunity tonight is the start of what could be something later down the line. And I think what's so important as well is, for me, my mentor has been Neil Everett, a sportscaster out of LA who I wanted to work for ESPN, and I wrote him a cold email and he got back to me and got on a call, got me an interview. I found out he had a crazy story. I put him in my book, and now we're always bouncing ideas off of each other. But the funny thing is, we couldn't be farther apart in the type of industries that we're in. I mean, he's a sportscaster. I'm in advertising, and I love helping people with their careers. But to me, that's been the most valuable relationship I've ever had. And so I think when we, take a step back from this is my industry, this is what I want to accomplish, and we just think, okay, what I want to learn, because you never know when you're going to cross paths with someone, or when someone's, career or what they've done has been so interesting and you connect with them in a certain way. And so I've always been one to say okay, I don't put pressure on myself on events like this, but I'm just going to try to get something out of it and hear more about, I've looked at all of you, and it seems like just by what Bradley has said, there's some pretty incredible people in this virtual room that we have here. And I'm looking here to see if there's anything else. I have one more thing that I'll add. So the 3 things that I'll say I learned, and I touched on one of them, right? Rejection. The reason I've gotten to where I am today is the rejection piece, which I talked about. It's the hardest thing in the world to talk about, to understand when you're in the moment, when you get that rejection. And it's not just careers, it's life, right? You could be on a dating app and someone rejects you, or you could do anything. And that rejection is what stabs you in the heart. It's that just crushes you. And I think for me, what I always tell myself, and this happens all the time, and I say, Mel, rejection is redirection. And I try not to focus on that, because the quote that I always say is, if you ask 100 people out on dates and you get 99 no's, that means you have a date. And if you focus on the positive, you will move forward. And that's something I always talk to people about. I always teach people, and I always try to remember myself. The second piece that I'll say is, never ask anyone for anything but a few minutes of their time. I think that's a mistake we make. And, in my course, which you guys will get, is it's all about, if you want to get a job, you have to get someone to refer you, because ultimately that's just how competitive it is. And that's what you need. But no one's going to refer you that doesn't know you, right? So you don't want to ask them. So if someone, went in my inbox and said, hey, Melanie, will you refer me to a job at Apple? I would say, no, I don't know who you are. Why would I do that? But if you said, hey, Melanie, I saw that you wrote a book. It's so impressive. I took a look at your website. Could I jump on a call with you for 10 minutes to hear more about you? I'd be like, yeah, I'll talk about myself all day. Okay, I hate to say that, but everyone loves talking about themselves. So keep that in mind. No one likes to do something for people that they don't know, and no one likes to add work to their plate. So even if someone decides to refer you, give them everything they need to refer you. Package it all up, make it so easy that all they have to do is press a button. And if you keep that mentality, even when you have a job, even, every aspect of your life, if you want someone to do something, make it as easy as. And so with that, I think, I just said a mouthful. It's funny, in a virtual world, you never get the responses. So I don't know if everyone's snoozing at me right now, but hopefully this was a little helpful. I'm always here. Bradley is just such an amazing resource. I'm sure a lot of you guys know him personally, but the time he takes to create these types of places where people can, learn and speak, and he's so, adamant about helping people with their careers. I'm just such a fan. I love working. I'm always available to work with him whenever. So you can find me on LinkedIn or hit me up on my website, but I'm excited for what's going to come out of tonight. It sounds like a great lineup, and I'll go ahead and go on mute now.
So I'm new to all this. I'm a mentor. I've been mentoring for 30 years. I don't know if Bradley, if it looks like he might not be with us for a second, but are we a group of mentors and mentees?
I think it's a mixed group.
A mixed group.
So I think that the first round, I'm part of the Moshe House, but this week I played a little bit of hooky. My sister's doing all the back end organizing with Bradley, so I'm just like here and enjoying a little bit of the event. We switched off. So basically it's mentors and mentees this first round, and then they're going to split us up into groups. So then each mentor will have a couple of mentees assigned to them, and then we'll be rotating. So the idea is that everybody will get to meet everybody just at different time. Kind of like a speed dating networking type thing is kind of what they suggested. But since we're waiting on them for a couple of seconds, Melanie, first off, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. It sounds, first off, amazing that you were able to get a mentor like Neil Everett to talk to you based off a cold email. I personally have sent a bunch of cold emails, and I feel like either they're too long or I just don't get any response back. Is there any really strong opening statement or subject title that you feel is like gets people to at least read the email? Because I feel like I've tried to be funny in emails. It doesn't really get me anywhere. I've tried to be more serious. So I haven't found that correct mix. I'd be curious to see what you suggest.
Absolutely. No, and I'll definitely, so that's such a great question. In my opinion, there's kind of two pieces of that, right? So as you're thinking about looking, and can you guys just raise your hand if you're like in the market to find a job and that's what you're here for and you're kind of navigating your career, if there's anyone. Okay, well, we have this is a very advanced group tonight of professionals. So I'll just say this, when you're looking to get a job, and maybe some of the mentors can also add to this as well, but when you're thinking about like the types of companies, and let's say you're like, oh, I want to work for Google. Well, that type of cold emails, the way that I look at it, and Glenn, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, it's so competitive, right? So like every opening, there's probably thousands of people that are applying. Tough to sift through, all those resumes. Ultimately, you want someone to hand deliver your resume, but it's tough to get someone to respond. And that's kind of the rejection piece. It's like, okay, so for me, I have kind of this way of, you're going to like cast a wide net and craft those. You want to craft your cold messages. And there's so many aspects of the cold message. When you're on LinkedIn, you have that connector piece, right? So it's like, okay, you can write your little note as you're connecting, and then you can go ahead and message them. And then there's Twitter and there's there's so many avenues to kind of get in front of someone. And so I think when you're doing cold messaging, just to people to try to land a job and like you're in the market, I always try to be, short and sweet, try to get as personal as possible, try to find common ground, and really just saying like, hey, one, super impressed by what you're doing. I'm usually really genuine, and I'm just asking for like 5 minutes of their time. So that's kind of how I position, and I might send 50 of those to people at Google or whatever company. And the person who decides to respond to me, that's where I'm going to say, okay, let's get on the phone. And then I'm thinking about really good questions to ask them when I'm on the phone. But when it comes to people like Neil Everett or, a couple of my clients, like one reached out to Mark Cuban and got a response, like the head of the Warriors, people that probably have like a lot more coming in their inbox are just a little tougher to reach. The way that I think about that is one, if you're trying to reach out to someone who's probably like a director, senior director or higher, they usually have an executive assistant, right? So sometimes you could send the best, funny, cold email. They're probably never going to see it. So there's different avenues. Like sometimes you have to figure out who's their gatekeeper. How do I get in touch with that person who will then send that note over to the person I need? The other piece of that is, while some people receive a lot of, you might think, oh, I'm going to cold email them or send a note on LinkedIn. Well, some people, I get a lot of notes on LinkedIn, but if you ever hit me up on Twitter, no one ever tweets at me. So you got to think about, where can I catch this person? Well, they're actually going to see it and prioritize the conversation. So a lot of times if they're pretty high up, I'll send them a note on LinkedIn. I'll figure out who their executive assistant is. I'll send them a tweet and say, sent you a note on LinkedIn. Please respond. We'd love to chat. Sometimes I'll comment on their Instagram. This sounds really stalkerish, but what I'm trying to say is you kind of have to hit them in a bunch of different, places. Not to say that's going to guarantee a response, but I think, and also doing research on that person. How do they typically interact with people? I go on their Twitter and I look it up, and, I'm just constantly understanding, like, if I'm going to try to get in touch with someone higher up, I'm going to put a day's worth of research into what's going to get them to respond to me. So that was, different pieces of the cold reach outs, but I think it's important to think about what your goal is in that situation and then how you can position yourself for the best chance.
Amazing. And Melanie, quick question for you. Were you able to go, sorry, I was talking with Deanna because we're arranging the groups. Were you able to go into like how to network with people in other industries, like in order to develop and form those pieces?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we think about our industry, and I think when it comes to someone else, everyone has a story, right? And everyone has, a lot of times someone was in that industry and they probably didn't start off in that industry, or that wasn't their end goal to be, wherever they're at now. So I think one of the best questions you can ask is just like, what's your story? Like, how did you get to where you are? Because when we're early in our career, we always have this vision that it's so linear. And that, you take these steps and you move up and then all of a sudden you're the head of your industry. And it's like, I don't know anyone that has a story like that. And so I just think it's so powerful to hear what that person's done. If they're a mentor here, they've probably accomplished something really cool and it's worth knowing. And while someone's telling you their story and you're hearing about their experience, and even if it's just a couple jobs back of like what they did to get to where they are, that's when I'm really thinking like, okay, I'm going to take a couple notes here, because if somebody resonates with me, that's what I'm going to follow up on. But in general, like another example of what's so great is when I had launched my book, I was like, I was so, not to say I was so poor, but it's not like I had money to have a whole PR company behind it. So I was doing my own PR and I really wanted to get in Forbes. I was like, okay, this is my goal. And I realized that, I had one of the people that was featured in my book, her husband had worked at Forbes. And it was like, that everyone in my book had completely different industries as me. And I had talked with her and she was like, yeah, like I would love for this to be in Forbes because like I'm in the book too. And so it just shows like, I'm not saying that you're going to get something out of someone with a different industry, but I've never said, I'm only going to network in my industry, because the people have so much to give, and you might, something might resonate with you. If you're hearing someone's story who's in a completely different industry, they might tell you a little bit about their experience and you might think, wow, I want this person in my life. I want to talk with them more often because what they've done sounds actually very similar. They have very similar skill sets to what I'm looking for. And I just think it's powerful to learn these types of things, in any way. Also, you might not stick in your industry. So many of the people that I started out with are in completely different industries now. And it's really hard to even know what goes on outside of your industry because you get so entrenched in, okay, you get in there and now that's your world and you're navigating it. But I love learning what's going on in other people's industries because that could create opportunity down the road for something that I didn't even know I was interested in. So I always encourage people, if you're going to take the time to be somewhere and be in a networking event and get to know people, you might as well open your mind up and not close it off, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen. This could be the day where you meet someone and all of a sudden you have a job next year at their same company. So I just encourage you to keep an open mind. Don't put pressure on yourself and take a step back to just learn something tonight. Hopefully you can walk out being a little bit more inspired than you were yesterday.
That was amazing, Melanie. Thank you so much for joining us. And also for the young professionals that are here this evening, you're all going to get access. We're going to do a raffle, but basically we're going to get access to Melanie's course. So it's so generous of you, Melanie, to provide access to that. And you already sent your book. So we're going to now go into the first set of breakout rooms. And then the way it's going to work is that we have the first set of breakout rooms, and then we're going to come back together in about 15 to 20 minutes. We're going to check into the breakout rooms and see how things are going. And then Glenn Schubert, who's joining us this evening, is going to share about his Google story and advice and those different pieces. And then we'll break out into our second set. So you'll be with different mentors and industry leaders. As far as for the structure, the recommended structure for the rooms, what I highly suggest is that you each first go around and introduce yourselves and kind of what you're looking for, what interested you in this evening. And then from there, you're going to kind of get advice, networking, what's a problem that you're facing, what are you looking for, and kind of collectively thinking about ways to help address or solve those things. So I'm going to open up the rooms right now. You've got great people that everyone's teamed up with, and then we'll come back together in 15 to 20 minutes. Sound good? Great. Thank you so much, Melanie, for joining us. And then just hang back a second when I do the rooms. Here we go. Cool. Okay. There we go. How you doing? How was it?
Hey, good. Yeah, was that okay?
Oh, do you want to stay for the first round or no?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, if it's only 15, 20 minutes, I'm happy to stay if you wanted to throw me in a room.
I've already signed everyone. So I would say not to worry about it. And then, yeah, thank you so much for being here, especially since, I should pause. Start recording again. Our next, so what's going to happen now is Glenn Tuber, one of Career Up Now's board members, and who's also the head of operations for one of the Google companies, is going to share about his professional story, his Google story, provide some advice. Glenn, thank you so much for being here. And then after Glenn speaks, we're going to break out into our second set, and people will be with different mentors and industry professionals than you were in the first round. So without further ado, welcome Glenn, and let's get this party started.
How long do you want me to target, by the way? Because I don't want to drone on too long, but I also don't want to go.
So I would say 10 to 15 minutes is great.
Okay, awesome. All right. Hello, everybody. A few of you have already met me because I was in the other room. So I'm going to give a little bit of a story. Some of what I'm going to talk about is going to be potentially kind of contradictory to what Melanie was talking about earlier. So my history is, I'm going to start way back because I think part of where I'm at today goes all the way back to my undergrad time. So I'm originally a materials engineer with a specialty in semiconductors from undergrad, where I went and worked at a microelectronics factory. My internships were at Intel back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Ended up working for IBM Microelectronics for many years. I was actually quite rapidly going through the ranks at IBM in the engineering department. I didn't really love engineering. I also have a minor in economics, and I was much more business oriented. And so as I was trying to get more to the business side, IBM's like, no, you're way too valuable for us technically. And I came to a realization our goals for me were not in alignment. And so it was at that point in time, I was like, well, I want to get to business. I'm an engineer. The thing to do back then, which was the mid 2000s, was to go get an MBA. It's not so much the thing to do anymore. If you read any news about MBA programs, they're quite undersubscribed these days. But back then, it was the thing to do. So I ended up leaving IBM. It was a little bit of a big ordeal. One of my mentors was a VP, and he wrote my letter of recommendation to go to grad school. And everybody knew we were close, and he had very senior people knocking on his door going, hey, did you know Glenn was looking to leave? And he's like, no, I had no idea. Obviously, blatantly lying about the situation. And just my last week at work, he came by, he's like, you got me in so much hot water. And I was like, sorry. So I started there, went to get my MBA, focused on operations and finance. During my internship for my MBA, I worked at United Technologies, so another big company. And as I was coming out, two things to note. Graduated undergrad right after 9/11. So that spring after 9/11, I graduated. So the world was in a bad place. I graduated MBA in 2008. So just as we were entering the Great Recession. And I made it through both. So I think for those of you that are in the early career or about to go to career, you can do this. I've done it twice. It doesn't make it's still stressful. Just realize it does work. It still can happen. So as I was coming out during the Great Recession, United Technologies, as much as they wanted me to come back, they were on a complete hiring freeze, scrambled around, trying to work anything angle I could, ended up at a small consulting company in Boston working with retailers on strategic procurement. I'm an engineer, materials, no concept whatsoever about procurement or retail for that matter. Learned it on the fly, had to learn it fast, working with CFOs, treasurers, controllers on financial products it takes to run businesses. And I ran a strategy group during that time. That company had some ethical issues. I recognized that after about a year. So I started kind of formulating, hey, how do I get out of this? During that time, I was starting to do a little bit of networking, kind of just thinking about what I wanted to do. I wasn't really sure. And I was one day on LinkedIn accepting a friend's request for connection. And while I was on there, back in the day, they used to say, hey, these are jobs you might be interested on the right-hand side. One of them was for strategic procurement at Google. And I'm like, well, I'll never hear from them, but I'll go ahead and throw a resume out there. Literally within 24 hours, because this was a Sunday night, by Monday, I had heard from them and they wanted to talk to me, and I was setting up a conversation with a recruiter on Tuesday. So Sunday to Tuesday, I'm already talking to a recruiter. Within 4 weeks, which by the way at Google is crazy fast, I had gone through all the interviews, and I was just waiting for a job offer. and ultimately got a job offer. And this was all done cold. So random thing on LinkedIn, never thought I'd hear back, got a job offer for Google to go work in strategic procurement. And so that was aligned with what I was doing, but still not like in theory, the grander scheme that I wanted. The interesting thing happened is about 2 weeks before I started, I got a call from my boss saying, hey, we got to talk about your job. And I was like, oh man. So this is end of 2010, going into 2011. We need to talk about your job. I was like, shoot, they're cutting it. And I get on a call and he's like, sorry, I left you a cryptic message, but we actually want to change your job. We know we hired you for strategic procurement, but we actually want you to run this program that looks at all of the spend across Google. And you're working with all of the senior executives that spend billions of dollars every year on how they're spending their money and what are the legal processes, finding gaps, reporting this back out to the CFO, head of finance, head of accounting, and head of legal. And they're like, would you be willing to do this? You're going to be working with like VPs, SVPs day in, day out, high visibility. And I was like, well, okay, if you think I can do it, sure. And they're like, yeah, you can do it because you're working with CFOs lately. So I think you're going to be fine. So I got to Google, started doing that. Everything was going great. Actually built up a lot of trust with very senior people at Google very quickly because I was willing to listen and learn what they were doing and not just assume what they were doing based upon other rumors I had heard throughout Google. And it was really that taking time to learn them, their business, and understand them really helped because the person that had held this role before me just went in there all the time saying, I don't care what you're doing, you're just doing it wrong. Where I was like, well, tell me your story, because this is really a story. Every time we get together, this is a story about you, and help me tell your story. And then also tell me where you have problems that you would love not to have. And we'll try to get you the resources to not have those problems anymore. So built up a lot of positive political capital that way. Did that for about a year and a half, and then started moving into more operational aspects where I was doing financial operations. So figuring out how to onboard suppliers globally, which you think, hey, that's pretty easy. It's not. Banking regulations around the world are crazy town. So had to go, again, learn real quickly, what are all the global banking regulations? How do I onboard suppliers? What are the legal requirements? And how do I make sure we can pay them and pay them timely? So went through all that, built a whole tool to help do this that was an internal tool that the suppliers would interact with. During this time, everything's going great. They start having me take on this other help desk on top of it that worked with the suppliers and Googlers that were having payment and credit card issues and all this other stuff. So I'm now running two processes, and we buy Motorola. And get a knock on the door. They're like, hey, we want you to go and run global procurement for Motorola. And I was like, really? And they're like, yeah, go ahead and go do this. And I was like, okay. So I had to go to Motorola. Now, Motorola at the time, it was just about to go bankrupt. So obviously there was problems within this company. So I had to go in there, again, quickly learn what this business was doing, how it was doing it, and how can it be done better. So within a year, went in, completely learned their operations, cut the operations down, streamlined it, got it running. We had done all this. At the same time, I was divesting in yet another portion of Motorola to another company. And we were just finishing up with all of this. We were actually literally in the debriefing meeting, talking about all the things that went really well, all the things that didn't go well, when Larry sent out the note, we're selling Motorola. And we're just like, what is going on here? We just went through a year of hell. I had been out of the country for 6 months out of that year, just traveling to all the various Motorola sites, all the various Google sites that were taking over processes and stuff. So I was on a plane over 130,000 miles that year. And I was just told, hey, everything you've just done doesn't matter anymore. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So my job was eliminated. I had to find another job at Google. Finance had a job for me. Didn't really want to do it. It was a lot of compliance type work. So I decided, hey, I got to do something else because I can't be known as this compliance person here at Google. It's just not it's anti-Google culture. And I couldn't keep doing it. So I had a long conversation with my director about this, and he got it. He's like, I get the reason. So found a job in the Google store, which is their hardware store. At the time, it wasn't great. It's still, depending on who you talk to, still not great, but it's better than where it was. So over there, they were hoping to make this a huge business like Amazon, which that just was never going to be. But that was their vision. So they were trying to staff up for it. I get over there, started learning the business, and about a month in, I had a meeting with my manager. I'm like, you're way overstaffed. You don't have a strategy to get where you want to go. And you have a bunch of people sitting idle. You don't need me. And she thought about it. she had some conversations and she's like, you're right, we're probably overstaffed. You called it. But we have this secret project out there that needs some strategic help on how to go to market. Can you just go help them? And so I went over and helped them. Turns out it turned into Google Fi. So about 6 months before Fi was going public, I had to help their front-end engineers integrate with the back end, and they had to learn how to manage inventory and go to market with physical goods, because that's just something Google's generally not good with. So I helped them set all that strategy. Once we got it public, I was still within the store, but the head of operations of Fi at the time said, I don't know how to do half of this stuff. Can you just come over and build some systems for me so I can run it? And I was like, I can do that, but I still don't think that's going to solve your problem, but sure. So I went over, started building all these systems, and the PMs, our product managers, are like, you've got to stay. You're way too valuable. So they started putting together this like push to keep me on the team. I ended up staying on Fi. And then as Fi got bigger, the business had to run. And that's something that Google doesn't do very well, is it builds things, but it doesn't run things. And so the PMs would build these things and they would sit there and nobody would touch them ever again. And I was like, hey, you have this problem over there. Do you want me to take it? And they would be like, yeah, somebody's got to work on it. So go ahead. Started doing that over and over again on various parts of the product. So our device protection program, our device trade-in program, our buy flows, all of that stuff. And ultimately, I started needing help because I was a single person. So I started getting headcount. They're like, yeah, you're running this really good. Just hire people, hire people. So I started hiring people. My boss started phasing out of his job, and I was kind of left alone. So here I am running the business, and it kept growing. And last year, 2019, was like our best growth year ever, continue to grow. And now I'm head of strategy and operations, and it's just everything it takes to run the business on a day-to-day basis, manage the P&L, it all comes through me and my team. So anything that ends up in the public, my team blesses, because we ultimately have to say, what is the scope and the forecast for this? So we have a very heavy hand in everything that takes place. And, Wednesday, we're about to present to the executive board on our 5-year plan on how we're going to grow and hopefully help the industry evolve. And so it's just been an ongoing hosts of changes for me, I would say. And I think that's the key aspect of my career, and probably any career, is learning and adapting and doing it quickly. If you can do that, you will more than likely be successful. It's when you don't learn and adjust and adapt to the changing environments around you, you can get left behind. And that goes for businesses too. As you start a business, you have to understand what your marketplace is doing, and don't stay static. If everybody's saying turn left, don't go straight. You gotta kind of follow the tea leaves on it. And so I think this goes in a bunch of different ways. It goes for your career, it goes for building a business, and ultimately probably your life, right? Like, take a look at your life on a regular basis and say, is this going where I want it to go? Is this where I want to be? And if not, taking an assessment of what do you need to change? And, I do this on a fairly regular basis right now, trying to figure out, do I want to be in the Bay Area? Do I still want to be at Google? What is my ultimate end goal? So, but these are things I go through. So that's kind of my career path. It's pretty big. It's pretty broad. It's really messy. Anybody that says that their career growth up towards the top was simple, smooth, and clean, they're probably underplaying the situation a little bit. I don't know very many people that are just all of a sudden they're at the top and ta-da, I'm here. So, but with that, I can kind of leave it off and see if there's a few questions or comments that want to happen. Oh, another word of advice too, it's always better to be lucky than good.
And if you want to ask a question, feel free, since we're such an intimate group, that you can unmute yourself and just ask. So
I have a question.
Oh, good, perfect.
So hearing about your transition between your different careers throughout Google, as well as just general career trajectory, how do you decipher your goals each year? Do you set yearly goals, or or is this something that by this point you set goals for something just in the next 5 years or next month? To that.
I am the worst person to talk to about this. My original manager at Google, she is great. I love her to death. Her and I are very different people. She is one of those regimented people that has goals for everything. I have a goal for this year. I have a goal for next year. I have a goal for 5 years. I have a goal for 10 years. I have no goals. I go with the wind. And it drives her bonkers. I will never forget. We were one of our performance cycles. She's giving, actually it was the year I got promoted. I got my promotion and she's like, you need to have structure to your career and you need to learn how to grow. And I'm like, I do? And she's like, yeah, why don't you? And I'm like, I don't know. Am I doing something wrong? She got really angry at me. She's like, I don't understand how this is happening for you. You have no path. And I'm like, yeah, but it's working. And so she still gets really frustrated about it because I'm one of those people that I'll go with, it's better to be lucky than good. So I'm really bad at answering this question. I really don't set goals for myself, except for the simple fact of I want to run an organization and I want to run it well. That's like my goal to me. And I keep it broad and I keep it generic just because you never know what the opportunity is going to be presented to you, and what your definition may not be another person's definition. So if you're ever in a situation where you're looking for a change and you present your definition, but it doesn't align to theirs, you could be talking different languages, which makes you miss out on an opportunity. So I keep it generic and broad and say, look, I love operations. I love running businesses. I'm not saying I need to be COO. I'm not saying I need to be a VP. I want to run an organization. I know I can do it, and I know I can do it well. And then you kind of get into the details and people are like, okay, that what you're talking about means this in my organization. And you kind of sort through it that way. But that's my goal. That's like my only goal.
Can I ask just like a personal question, because I was just curious about this. Working in operations, do you find yourself like just yourself as a very organized person? Does that play any factor in you working in that field, or not really?
My girlfriend's on the couch behind me. And so what I'm about to say, I'm very precise. So by nature, I'm a very precise person. And I stick to my word. I think that's probably the more important thing than organized. Yes, I'm probably inherently organized because of those two factors, but I don't sit there and say, how can I keep things like this? It's more about, I create processes because I want to know where it's going to end. And so it's like, how do I make sure if I get onto this path, I always end in that destination. Mm-hmm. So it's that preciseness and wanting to predict where I'm going to go that drives it more so than the organizational side, if that makes sense.
Hi, Glenn. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us and speak with us. First off, your story is really impressive, and the changes and jumps you've done throughout your career is really amazing. So I'm curious if you have any advice on how you were able to kind of learn and adapt so quickly. Is there any like tips or techniques? What do you do? Because it sounds like you already have a 60, 70-hour work week. So at what point in time do you sit down and like learn these things that you're kind of have to quickly know the lingo and know what's going on to really be effective?
So generally speaking, I don't learn ahead of time. I learn on the fly. That works for me, and that has worked for me through time. I think my breakout session earlier was talking about kind of like building a brand. And I think I have a couple of different brands. One, I'm really effective. I'm really precise, and I run a tight ship. And then also I adapt very well and very quickly. It's just a nature of me. And I leverage that adaptability to learn. And so when I'm in meetings, if something doesn't make sense, I'll either ask a question in the meeting, or I'll follow up with the expert after the fact and say, hey, can you explain this to me? Like I meet with engineers all the time. I'm not a software engineer by any means, but at the same time, I know enough where I can talk their lingo, and they get me up to speed. They get me up to speed enough to where I'm dangerous and I can have a conversation about it. But would I be able to actually implement anything? Heck no. But you have to understand what your role is, what level of expertise you are, because you can't carry all of that in your head. So it's self-recognizing of what's important, holding on to those nuggets, and then keeping conversations when you're learning to that level of detail. Don't let it derail unless it actually is going to add value. And so there's lots of times where even with my team, as I'm training them or helping them or other people, they'll start asking questions and I'll be like, look, I can explain this. I don't think it's in your best interest, so I don't want to go there because it's going to clutter you and it potentially is going to confuse you. So let's keep it to this level of detail, because that's where the value is for you, and it's going to make everything so much simpler. And so it's just having that self-recognition, especially if you're dealing with somebody that's not going to help you have that recognition as you're going through that process.
Amazing, Glenn. Thank you so much. We're going to now break out into the second breakout sessions. They're going to last 15 to 20 minutes, and then we're going to, again, rejoin. So here we go. I'm opening all rooms. Who would like to go next?
I can go. Just one of the last pieces of advice that Glenn gave was, once you hit a point in your career where you feel like you're a little bored and maybe not being challenged, that might be a good time to kind of evaluate and see if you want to continue down that path or look for other opportunities.
Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else want to share? It has a takeaway?
I think one of my favorite takeaways was also the networking tips on how to reach out to people and the different ways that we can reach out to people. I think that we generally think that like LinkedIn is the way to go, and just thinking about it differently is kind of a interesting way of getting the same result that you want. So that's really cool.
Fantastic. And then anyone else want to share, or should I end with our closing note?
I've got one. One of my takeaways is really owning on what your strengths are and working to establish that as a brand within your organization, as well as those that you choose to network with.
Love that. Diana, do you want to end with something? And then I'll share our little pre-Rosh Hashanah sharing.
I think I'm going to leave it all to you.
I appreciate
We're
that.
in good hands.
Okay, awesome. So right now we're entering into the time period of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And it's according to Jewish wisdom and Jewish tradition that this is the time period where it's determined so many things about our next year. You know, who will live, who will die, how much money will you make, what will the weather be like, and so many different things that specifically apply to who we are and what we are going to be for this next year, which is why it's such an auspicious and important time of the year. And one of the really great idea that I got from Tanya, who teaches a weekly, multiple times a week, Jewish women's classes, is that at the end of the day, it's of course, you know, God's involved, but at the end of the day, it's up to us to make the decisions of what we're going to commit ourselves to as far as changing, being better, how that's going to apply to our personal life, how that's going to apply to our professional life, and taking pieces away with an attachment that's what's going to improve all areas of our life. So I'm going to leave everyone with a little blessing that going into this new year, that all of your worthy endeavors should be successful, and that you should find the specific things that you're passionate about and will further you along your life and professional journey, and that you be able to easily embrace those so that you can be as successful or more successful than you ever imagined yourself to be. So thank you everyone for joining. If anyone wants to hang back, that's totally good. And if not, I really want to thank Len and Yael and Rachel and Tanya for joining us tonight. And this has been really awesome. So thank you everyone, and Lashana Tova.
Thank you guys and everybody for
everyone.
joining.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Bye.